All right, so here's our first example. Consider the following inequality problem. 2x plus 4 divided by 2 is greater than 6, and negative 5x minus 5 is greater than 40. So step 1 in Hawks is going to ask you to solve the first inequality, which I've already done for you. Step 2 in Hawks is going to ask you to solve the second inequality, which I've already done. If you're struggling with that, you need to go back to the 9.7 videos where we actually look at solving inequalities. But just for the sake of time, I went ahead and solved them for us. Here's our graph and our interval notation for the first one, graph and interval notation for the second one. Now, let's put it all together. So then in step 3, so right here, it says, using the answers from the previous step, solve the overall inequality problem. Express in interval notation. Okay, the question is asking me for and. So where it says solve the overall graph, I'm looking for the and part, the overlap part. Well, in order to find the overlap, I need to have both graphs on one number line. So I'm going to take each graph and put it on one number line. So I've got 4 going to infinity. And I've got negative 3 going to negative infinity. Let me change that color. Negative 3, so this is the second inequality. And then it says, where do the graphs overlap? Where are they both? And the graphs don't overlap. One's going to the left, one's going to the right, and they won't ever cross because they're kind of going in opposite directions. And so this is going to be the empty set because there is no place where the graphs overlap. All right, so for example 2, I would pause the video here, go ahead and solve each of these equations, get y by themselves. All right, so you should have gotten that. So I solved the first one, I solved that up top, and then I went ahead and graphed it and wrote the interval. The one on the right, solved it, graphed it, wrote the interval. Now step 3 says, using the answer from the previous step, solve the overall inequality. The overall being the or part. Or is I'm going to put the graphs together, and then let's see what turns out. So I'm first going to graph this one. All right, so I've got negative 7 going to the right. Okay, that's that first inequality. And then I've got 5 going to the left. And I'm looking for or. I'm looking for the combined of the two. And so when I combine these two graphs, I'm going from negative infinity to positive infinity because they're going, I've got arrows on both ends. So the interval notation is going to be negative infinity to positive infinity, and then the graph is going to be the whole thing shaded. So in Hawks, you're going to shade that whole thing. You don't need the brackets or parentheses anywhere. You are going to just shade the whole thing. All right, and then the last one, Again, I would pause the video and solve it for yourself. And then you should get out the graph, the interval, the solution, the graph, the interval. Okay, step 3. Using the answer from the previous set, solve the overall inequality and express in interval notation. All right, so I've got this first graph, 2 going to infinity. I'll do that one first in green, and it's a bracket. So I've got 2 going to positive infinity. And then I've got negative 9 going to infinity with a parenthesis. Right? Or is going to be where they both are. And so I'm combining them. So the left furthest point I've got is this negative 9, but then it's going off to infinity. And then the graph that I would graph is just 9 with a parenthesis to infinity. I don't need that weird bracket in the middle because the graph comes over it. If this question had said and, if it had said and instead, it would just be this part. It would be bracket 2 to infinity, and I would just graph from the bracket because that's the only place on the graph where they both are. So you really have to pay attention and versus or because that's going to change the overall graph. Everything's the same with step 1, solving, step 2, solving. It's in that step 3 where you have to go back. Am I taking and where they overlap, where they both are, or am I taking or where I'm combining them together? I'm putting the two graphs together.